Yeah, I think especially what we're doing is a lot more maybe business to business focused. Um, but if you look at the farming community, right? At times it was very, very manual. Now they have a lot more technology and equipment. That industry is really embracing different and new innovation. And I think that's super exciting. Well, as the populations continue
Yeah.
to increase, we're going to need more food to feed people. Well,
Welcome to the New World Podcast, where we delve into the ever changing and accelerating pace of global change and its impact on our lives. I'm your host, Paul Flores, broadcasting live from the New World Studio. Today, we're diving into the world of AI and automation. As an enthusiast and expert in lead generation, I will guide you through understanding and leveraging these technologies for your business and for your personal use. And don't forget, AI and automation might be unstoppable forces, but that doesn't mean you are powerless. Tune in to learn how to make them work for you and not the other way around. But first, let's meet our guest. Welcome to the New World Podcast, where we navigate the changing world around us. I'm your host, Paul Flores, specializing in lead generation and AI automation, here to help you understand how our world is changing and what it means for you. Today, we have an amazing episode for you. Joining us is Michelle Madaras, the dynamic president and co-founder of WingXpand. Michelle has a fascinating background transitioning from a TV reporter to an aerospace leader. She is at the forefront of transforming the drone industry with WingXpand's innovative expandable wing drone technology. In these episodes, we'll delve into Michelle's journey, the groundbreaking work at WingXpand, by the way, talk about an amazing company name, and how their technology is poised to revolutionize the future of aerospace. Michelle, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
well, right back at you, John Paul. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. By the way, before we begin in the in-depth questions, because I do have some, can you tell us who Michelle is? What's your expertise, experiences, and what keeps you busy these days?
Sure. Well, that's a big question, but I will try to keep it as brief as possible. I would say that at the end of the day, I've always been a very curious person. I love to learn new things. I love to learn about people's problems. Really ask, as a journalist, ask those specific questions that really help paint the picture of the problems or the issues that people are facing. So what we do here at WingXpand is we try our best to really solve those pain points and those
Yeah.
problems for our customers. How I got into this, I actually spent about a decade in television news as a TV reporter, and the news industry started using drones about maybe 10 or 12 years ago now. And so a lot of the teams that I was on and worked with, we'd find ourselves, whether it was at a flooding or a fire or a tornado or, these types of events where not only we as journalists were trying to use drones, but also the first responders at those situations were trying to use drone technology. And I think we all knew they are, interesting and they're novel. And I think there are a lot of good capabilities. But at that point, kind of almost a decade ago now, they really weren't what professionals needed. And so my co-founder came from the aerospace and defense industry, and that was really the industry that started predominantly using these types of drones first. But then you started seeing commercial users try to get their hands on what they could, which were often just kind of what you could buy at a big box store, the drones that have 30 minutes of flight. The connectivity on them isn't super great. The video quality on those drones really wasn't that great. And so where we came together was he knew there was a defense need out there. I knew there was a commercial need out there. And what we did was we really tried to develop a solution that could serve both sides of those marketplaces, because these are professionals users that are trying to use them to get their job done, but they shouldn't be hard. They shouldn't be complex. They should add value to your day without you having to, pull out a user pamphlet and flip through every single page and, know how to program a robot. It should be as simple as maybe the iPhone you have in your pocket, right? You should pick it up and you should be able to use it. And that's really where we find ourselves today, is trying to build a product that is easy to use, approachable, but very capable for professional users.
That's fascinating. And by the way, I saw that your drones typically last 5 times longer and carry 10 times more payload than other drones, which
Mm-hmm.
is fascinating because if you think about it, if something must stay up for that long, it's gonna have a huge battery, meaning there's less time and there's less payload. But yours is amazing. Can you tell us why
Yeah,
that is?
thank you. Yeah, what we kind of liken it to is, remember, everybody had a desktop computer, and some
Yeah.
people early on were like, well, why do you need a laptop? Well, because it's powerful and it's portable. That's really what we're doing with drone technology. Is it, no kidding, goes from a backpack to a full 8-foot wingspan in a little
Really?
less than 2 minutes. And then, so if you remember those lightsaber toys, you kind of
Yeah.
flick them and they expand out. That's kind of what our telescoping wing technology looks like. We do have several granted patents, both in the US and then in, I think, over 100 countries, but that list keeps growing. And so, no kidding, that's that patented telescoping wing design. You quickly assemble this thing, you throw it up in the air, and it's ready to go in a little less than 2 minutes. It has very powerful cameras on there and sensors that have the ability to see day and night. They have the ability to measure things down on the ground with centimeter level accuracy. And then it has the ability to see across different bands of light. So, like if you're thinking about how plants grow, you have the ability, based on certain colors that you may see when you do that flight, to understand the health of those plants. So maybe this area needs nitrogen, maybe that
Yeah.
area needs phosphorus, and those types of things. So you basically just put in the camera or sensor that you need for your industry. And it's meant to be more of a, Mr. Potato Head based on the user's needs.
That's amazing. And by the way, personally, did you have a hard time transitioning from a TV reporter? And I know that you had a brief experience with marketing. Did you had a hard time transition from that to being joining an industry that is not that big at the time, because drones were usually just for the first responders or very commercially used and not for you know the use that we're doing today. Did you had that hard time doing that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've always, like I said, been a curious person, and I really am just fascinated by what drives people, what their needs are. And so, as we started developing and building out the product, I was used to doing,
Yeah.
questions and answers as a
Yeah.
journalist. Don't kind of lead your witness. You really want to be able to garner that information and what they're looking for. And so that was one of the first things that, as we were doing product discovery and trying to decide, well, what are the right specifications? What do we want to build this to? We really had to understand their needs, how they wanted to use the products, and how their needs weren't being met today. And so that goes back to being a good listener. That goes back to, you can't really talk over people's heads. You really just need to connect with them, and ultimately build something that they want. I think we find ourselves at a really exciting time, because I think this type of technology is changing so rapidly. We really are at a really interesting point where people come to us and they say, hey, I want to use it for this. And those are the things that keep me so excited to keep building and iterating on what we have today.
That's amazing. And by the way, I see the remember that you told me that to launch your drone, you just need to throw it. And
Mm-hmm.
most of the drones that I've seen and watched, most of them needs these huge catapults or needs to have
Mm-hmm.
this long landing or takeoff, you know, uh, long takeoff sites to just be able to work? Did you prioritize to actually make your drone something that people can just show and work?
Exactly. So traditionally, the military grade systems, and they were really only available to mostly military and civil type uses. Um, those do require these huge launchers. And so, no kidding, what we thought is, this needs to go from the back of a squad car, the back of a fire truck, or, from an airplane and be ready to, you just need to shake it and throw it so that it's ready to go in a moment's notice. I think that's the really compelling part for a lot of people because typically today, a lot of what folks are using are things like helicopters. Well,
Yeah.
helicopters cost about $1 million a year in just maintenance and sustainment. That's not even the cost of the upfront purchase of a helicopter, right? And so it can be hard for, local municipalities or even businesses to be able to afford a helicopter. And, they're launching from one place where there might be weather going on, but they need to go to another scene that may be, far away from where they are. So the idea of having this on a person, ready and deployable within just a couple minutes is really what we feel like is really changing the game. And it's really restructuring how people think about emergency response in really kind of bad situations, unfortunately. But we hope to help those people that are helping us during those emergencies.
And how do you actually get the plane to land? Do you need to have some sort of mechanism to catch it? Because I saw some drones need something to catch the drone, or do you just do it by hand or a field somewhere?
Yeah, so great question. It actually comes in for like a low speed stall landing. So it just kind of sets itself down on its belly, on its fuselage. There is a camera in there that kind of retracts itself back in. So you don't worry about damage, anything like that. But what it is it's actually autonomous. So think of
Yeah.
it as, it's flying itself like a Tesla or like, a lot of these other self driving things these days. You can pre-plan and program a mission on it's called a GCS, a ground control station, or you can do that on, more of a traditional laptop. You set what's called a waypoint,
Yeah.
and it'll follow that route. Or you can have it adjust on the fly. So if I want to see something further, I can tap it and it'll fly that way. But it's meant to really be easy to use. And that was really from a software perspective, right? Because we not only made the airframe, but we make the software that not only flies the airplane, but does this automatic detection and alerting of threats. And so though we really, as a company, have not only had a lot of progress on an interest in the drone itself, but also the applications, what the drone can do, right?
You know what I like about autonomous drones is not just that you don't need to actually learn how to fly it. You just need to learn the system on how to fly it. But also, if
Mm,
you're just a team of few people and you need to fly a lot of drones, you can do it. You don't need to
mhm.
have five people controlling five drones. You can have one controlling five, maybe 10 because of your system. That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, John Paul, you're hitting on something really pretty big there. So, yes, we do, from a technological standpoint, have the capability of being able to do that. But there's a lot of regulations still
Yeah.
today about how and where you can operate these things, particularly in like urban environments, over crowds of people. So, I think those things are definitely changing. And so when we operate on military bases, we operate under military rules. And when we operate in commercial senses, we operate in America under the FAA, so the Federal Aviation Administration. So, obviously, safety is crucial and paramount, especially if you're going to use these types of systems. So, we really have to do a lot of homework besides just, knowing how to fly the plane to make sure that we're doing it in the appropriate manners.
That's understandable. And by the way, what are the current use cases that you have at WingXpand?
Mhm.
What different
Mhm.
sectors that you're currently using your drones?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We do not only commercial, so things like public safety, inspection, agriculture, but also defense. And I'll give you an example of that, though. Sometimes these things bridge both categories. And what I mean by that is for the United States Air Force, we're actually working on an early wildfire detection algorithm. We're going to go show them in a couple weeks here. And what it does is when you throw the aircraft up, like let's say after, maybe there was a big thunderstorm that moved through, and sometimes these thunderstorms can cause fires. Well, after the most of the storm has kind of moved through, you can put this thing up in the air, and our wing X-ray has the ability to scan the area and notify the operator if it thinks it sees the early starts of a fire. And today, typically, that's just it's a human calling in and saying, "Hey, I think I see smoke." Well, by that point, it might actually be a really big and harder to maintain fire than
Yeah.
using these drones for those types of purposes very early on after a storm is finishing.
Yeah, plus if it's too big of a fire, it's hard to contain and you're gonna need a lot
Mhm.
more manpower to do that.
Exactly. And this not only can help you with that quick, no kidding, hey, here's the location of where that thing is happening, but also how do you evacuate people?
Yeah.
You know how to evacuate people from a scene or get those fire trucks into that situation in a safer manner so that they know and can understand the direction of the wind and different things that may be impacting their triage capabilities.
It's amazing. What sectors do you want in the future to be using your drones?
I think that's the exciting part, and something we really pride ourselves on is that we are what's based on what's called an open systems architecture. And we also have a modular payload. So all of that is just really a fancy way to say we are building an aircraft that's meant to be capable. And certain industries have their own specific modalities or uses and cameras and systems that they're used to using. You can plug those into our aircraft and we can help write you software to better use those things out in the field because we understand, people have all historically already been kind of operating in the
Yeah.
ways that they're used to. Now we're just going to start putting that technology onto drones and using our expertise as drone experts and their expertise as let's say farming or in agriculture, and they're bringing that knowledge base, and we have our team of really well-rounded people that have different experiences in different industries, but we're using that together to really build products that are really exciting, and they really, no kidding, are unlocking new use cases. We had somebody approach us. They want to use it to inspect eagles nests, so they have a requirement that they have to inspect these eagles nests to make sure that they're not causing any damage to the environment. And so that was, I never would have guessed that. If you would have asked me, I never would have picked that out of one of the use cases that people would be wanting to use our drone for. But it makes sense, and it's better than the methods that they're using today. And I think that's the exciting part about this technology is I think we'll be surprised in the ways and spaces that it pops up.
It's amazing, and I think if people has a choice on going with different drone companies, I think they're gonna go with someone who can actually have a drone deployable on the spot and not need these huge catapults like other ones have. And I think that is an amazing perks that you have as a drone manufacturer.
Well, thank you.
And also, what makes WingXpand's product unique about what's unique about WingXpand's drones, and what makes it better than the other ones?
Mhm. Well, you kind of hit on it already. We do fly 5 times longer and carry 10 times more payload than any system that can fit in that same size backpack or footprint, right? So I think that inherently is already a big vote of confidence from some of our users. I think as we continue to move forward, though, I think the really big thing is yes, the technology is cool, but it's our team. It's our team's
Yeah.
ability to really build cutting edge robotics. And that's at the end of the day what this is. It's a flying robot. And we have such a talented team that is passionate about working together and solving the problems for our end users, our customers. And that's what I'm really excited about.
That's great. And when you first started designing or maybe creating your first drones, what are the most common issues or technological barriers that you saw?
Well, robots don't like to fly. So that was probably a big one. I think anytime you make something that flies, right, like what goes up must come down.
Yeah.
Um, those things are difficult. We as a team are a very agile, high growth startup. And so, we take chances, we take risks, not safety risks, but risks in
Yeah.
terms of, to accelerate the speed and certain bigger businesses tend
Yeah.
to have, like you must do it in this step and we can't do this until we do that. But we do really try to kind of push the envelope on some of those things. And what we've come up with from what I'm going to call a rapid
Yeah.
engineering process has been incredibly helpful to us as a company. There are so many different technologies out there, whether that's 3D printing and agile development, that'll allow you to really go from, no kidding, the back of a napkin sort of sketch all the way to your first sort of trying it. We tend to kind of push the limits on, hey, we just need to get it out there into the real world and see if it works and learn from, what doesn't work. And that's important.
That's amazing. And also, I saw that your drone is more of the plain looking drones, and there's other drones that
Mhm.
are quadcopter styles. What made you choose that style, and why is it better than the other one?
Yeah, well, there is a reason why when you travel on an airplane, you travel on an airplane with wings.
Yeah.
The flight efficiencies, the weight that you can carry, you're not beating the air into submission with rotors, right? That takes energy, that takes more battery. Instead, you're using the physics of lift on your side to help you really sustain some of those longer flight times. So that's part of the reason why we decided that. Some other things too is because the camera feed and a lot of what we're doing is very important. People want to be able to really clearly see. You don't have like the shake that can come with some of those multi-rotors. So for our types of capability and to be able to fly 2+ hours, that's why we decided to go with more of the wing design.
Plus, if I think about it, at most cases, it's safer to have wings on your drones just because of the fact that even if the engine fails or if it runs out of battery, it can still fly into a great location that it can land.
For sure. It's funny you mentioned that. There have been some new studies that have come out about, especially using these types of drones over crowds. And they, no kidding, use like in the same way they do crash test dummies in cars. They're doing like crash test dummies for, to understand like what kind of damage could a drone do to a human. And things with, wings, and we really only have the one prop on the front, they tend to do less damage. Yeah,
Really, I'd imagine a plain style because it just have a point would do more damage, but it doesn't.
no, I mean they're meant to be durable, they're meant to be
Yeah.
tough, but like at the end of the day, those rotors can they can cause like very bad lacerations and can end up, you know. So that's why, like, even in general, and
Yeah.
this is my personal opinion, but people that like try to catch them in their hands, like that can be pretty dangerous. I personally don't want to do it. Like I want it to come in and land, and then I can turn off my power button and feel safe to be able to handle this system. But to each their own. I like my fingers.
Yeah, and most of the time those drones they don't have a cover on the blades. And there's a lot of
Yeah.
things that could go wrong. Maybe there's an electrical failure that just makes the drone when you're catching it go up and hits your face or whatever. I mean, that's scary.
As I told you, robots don't like to fly. So sometimes they misbehave, and you got to be prepared for those days that they misbehave or times that they misbehave. And so, that's why safety is so important.
By the way, how was your experience as a TV reporter for two networks actually helped you with what you do currently?
Sure. So I have the ability through my work as a journalist to, see firsthand how industries were starting to adopt and use drone technology. Some of the stations I worked at, one of which was down in Southern Illinois, and I had the opportunity to really learn the importance of agriculture. Also in that region, there's a lot of logistics transport through the river. So, like, think about barge traffic and the rest. Um, Teams were already starting to use drones to understand, hey, maybe I can use them to see the health of my crops. Because if you think about it, the way today they do a lot of that is they physically have to walk into a field. And if you've ever walked into, a cornfield, they're as tall as you are. There's a bunch of
Yeah,
bugs. You can't really see everything. You don't really know, unless you cover every single acre of a field, which can be difficult by foot. You can't really tell a fungus or some kind of insect or infestation until no kidding, are physically out there seeing it. Well, drones now all of a sudden are really changing the landscape there because you can fly on our drone 1,000 acres on one battery. And just
really.
if, let's say, you have more than 1,000 acres, you land the drone, you pop in the new battery, and you put it back up in the air. So now, instead of it taking maybe a weeks sometimes
Yeah.
to cover the entire field, you now are doing that what you used to do in a week in a couple of hours.
Yeah, plus those funguses or viruses within agriculture, they spread fast.
Yes. And so that's it. You have to be able to rapidly triage or respond or understand, hey, maybe you need to cull that area. And sometimes you can even, if you're doing it early enough in the season, you can replant some of these things or notice areas where maybe it didn't take and you need to replant.
And how do you see the your drones personally evolving in the next 5 to 10 years?
How do I, or how do folks in agriculture?
Uh, let's say, which fields do you think in the next 5 to 10 years would actually go into more use cases for drones?
Hmm. Um, Something that I really want to personally support, and I know just how evident a need this is because of my former walk of life as
Yeah,
a journalist. We just see how many natural disasters occur each year, and that number only continues to seem to increase. Whether that's hurricanes or flooding, fires, these types of things, even unfortunately man-made disasters, things like
yeah.
active shooter situations, very large crowds that can end up having issues. Um, I really do think that these are the types of areas where drones will really start changing the landscape. Um, because drones like ours with that long flight time, could you imagine being able to tell someone that's stranded on their roof, hey, help is coming, or maybe I can drop you, a life preserver or a radio so that then you can have contact with first responders. That's an area I'm really excited to see WingXpand grow into. And we're on the beginning steps of that today. And we're doing that through a lot of military work. But I think you're starting to see on the civil side,
Yeah.
organizations really start to understand the value that drones have and how they can really change the paradigm of emergency response, particularly as it relates to natural disasters.
And what I like the most is, as the test of time, technology gets more affordable, and I think most people or most use cases that wants to have drones and can't afford right now would be able to do so in the future.
Hmm. Yeah, I think especially what we're doing is a lot more maybe business to business focused. Um, but if you look at the farming community, right? At times it was very, very manual. Now they have a lot more technology and equipment. That industry is really embracing different and new innovation, and I think that's super exciting. Well, as the populations continue
Yeah.
to increase, we're going to need more food to feed people. Well, you can't make more land. How do you make more
Yeah.
food? Well, you have to be more effective with the land that you have. And so I think these types of tools are already starting to bubble up in places where they're really needed. And that does take business owners being able to take a chance on the unknown in the hopes that, innovation will be that thing that unlocks a new future for them.
That's amazing. And because you mentioned earlier that you hope this your drones could help not only these natural disasters and military use, but also if there's a situation that maybe there's people who are armed, and I think your drone would be perfect in terms of reconnaissance just because of the fact it's not
Mm-hmm.
as noisy as those
Mm-hmm.
other quadcopters that we have in the market.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's meant to, it's not necessarily super fast, but it is
Yeah.
really quiet under about
By the way,
200
so
feet or above 200 feet. And it is really quiet above 200 feet. And I think what you're kind of hinting at, and what we see is it's really meant to be, hey, I see something happen and I can put it up. Or maybe, let's just say there's a large crowd. Maybe you're doing like as a police
yeah,
officer gets a call saying, hey, somebody is down in this area, we need more help, or we need to see what's going on. That could be everything from a medical emergency all the way through, an active shooter situation, but you don't know until you can see it. And
yeah.
this type of asset gives you the ability to see things in a way that historically has only been done by like helicopter or larger assets like that.
Yeah, and most of the
Satellites,
time,
they don't move as quickly.
since your drones are easier to deploy, they can just maybe if there's a situation, throw it, and that drone can be in the area faster than the police officers. And if they try and look at the situation, there's no risk of getting shot.
Hmm. Exactly. Yeah, it's really and it is funny how all of these industries, they sound so different from one another, but at
Yeah,
the end of the day, we're solving a lot of the same points: food security,
yeah.
disaster response, the ability to see a situation from multiple angles, right? That's it's a common thread and a common problem that a lot of different folks share.
That's amazing. And in terms of your industry as a whole, the drone industry, where do you think it's headed? Do you think a lot more people would find the application for this technology and use it for their business, or do you think more of just like the business to business folks would be able to get one of the drones?
Mhm. Good question. I think where we're focusing a lot of our efforts today, maybe a little different than some other drone providers out there, because if you think about it, they're all tools in a toolbox. You can't build a whole house with just a
Yeah,
hammer. You you need different tools for different missions. So a lot of the folks that we see probably using systems like ours are probably more business folks or military type folks. But I do think they can be beneficial for people that are trying to use them for real estate. That's probably not a good fit for us. It's like
yeah.
using a hammer for a fly swatter. It's a little bit of overkill. But I think there are some uses out there that will continue to rise. I got married a few years ago. Somebody used a drone to take beautiful videography of our wedding. I think things like that, I think people will use them. I don't, I don't know if it's going to be a one size fits all. But I think today the military already sees and knows the value that drones can bring. They've doubled and tripled down the fact that they realize how much these are needed. I think the commercial side of things is lagging a little bit behind that, just because it's the rate of adoption.
Yeah,
It's still newer for them than it is for the military. And I think once you start seeing some of those applications, you're going to see more businesses, and then you may see more growth just kind of on your average direct consumer. But some of that has to do with regulation and just kind of, it's still all new. These are the early adopters, you know?
that's amazing. And since I saw that your drone that was amazing looking is in the gunmetal color, like, is that a design choice or is that actually something that is useful for the drones itself?
Yeah, so that gunmetal color is actually it's called carbon fiber.
Yeah,
So maybe if you have like a really nice like high-end racing bike, they're made out of that because it's very structural.
light.
It's very rigid, but it's
Yeah.
also a very lightweight. And so much like myself, right? You're always fighting weight
Yeah.
when you're in aerospace. You want to make the lightest and strongest thing possible, and so that's part of the reason why we went with the composite design for that. And yes, you could paint it any color. You could paint it pink. You could paint it purple. But we just traditionally like that composite, so we do that for a lot of our folks, unless somebody asks for a specific color.
That's great. And also that drone at your back, how much can that, for example, actually carry? Because as you said, your drones typically can carry 10 times more payload than other ones. What can that carry?
Yeah, so that can carry about 2 pounds for 2 hours. We can push up to about 5 pounds of payload.
Yeah.
You're going to get about 45 minutes to an hour of flight time. Or you can fly for with 1 pound for about 3 hours. So again, it
Hours
really just
of
depends
flight.
on what kind of equipment you're putting in it for your processing needs.
Hours of flight time is still very amazing, especially with what we currently have today.
You know, it was funny. We've been working with a local law enforcement group, and they said even when they use their helicopters, they can only have them on a scene for about 2 hours on average a
Yeah,
time because of their fuel. Like they can only have so much fuel in their aircraft too.
yeah.
And so when you look at, well, either or, it starts to make more and more sense. And I think that's where you're really going to start to see people shifting their mindset, is because,
Yeah.
well, how many people can actually have access to a helicopter? Not as many as probably can have access to a drone.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, helicopter fuel is still at the end of the day more expensive than just having
Exactly.
batteries that are chargeable.
Yeah, exactly.
And most of the time, the use of the helicopters are just for reconnaissance, and they can't actually land the thing. So it's kind of
Hmm.
an overkill for what their use is currently. And the drones is just perfect for it.
Yeah, well, that's where we get really excited. I do think you know, people are just starting to inch into what they can do. I think a couple years ago, if you would have asked, people would have said, "Oh, drones are meant for delivering pizzas." Well,
Yeah,
that's not the only and primary reason. Like, maybe can they do it? Sure. But for us, and we're and how they're actually being used today, it's for a lot of like what you're mentioning, being able to see situations as those things change and evolve on the ground so quickly. At least then you have a better understanding of what's going on and how to keep your people safe, and addressing those types of situations and how to help, innocent people.
yeah. And if I'm not mistaken, most of the people working in the aerospace industry is aerospace engineers or at least have some background in engineering. Do you think your expertise in journalism and your experience as a TV reporter actually gives you the ability to see things on other angles that they cannot?
Well, I sure hope so. It's my co-founder, right, spent about a decade in defense at one of the major aerospace companies. Prior to that, spent time in the intelligence community. So really understood that mindset and those needs. He is an engineer by trade, but at the end of the day, you do need to be able to be a holistic business. If you build the coolest thing, but it doesn't actually solve anyone's
Yeah.
problem, it's just a cool widget that sits on the shelf. And
Yeah.
so at the end of the day, it really does take our strong team that has experience across so many different industries, whether that's public safety, defense, agriculture, people with all these different talents and knowledge bases really do help sculpt and put their fingerprints on building a solution that's meant for those industries. And then us meeting people and hearing firsthand their problems, what they're going through, how they're solving these issues today. We wouldn't be able to do it without them because they're ultimately the people we're trying to serve. And so it's about having that right compilation of team and listening that has helped us get where we are today and will help us, and at the end of the day, go where we want to go. It's kind of silly to say, but at the end of the day, everything, in my opinion, boils down to customer service, which sounds weird for a drone company to say, but it really is about customer service and customer satisfaction.
Yeah, and what I like about every interview that I'm doing is at the end of the day, the conversation leads back to people is business, and people,
Mm.
is the first thing that we need to serve. And that is amazing.
Well, thank you.
And also, since you already mentioned that your drones have military, law enforcement, agriculture, and first response uses, they also see it going for other industries. And also, you already mentioned agriculture. Do you have any other industries in mind?
Yeah, I think inspection and like surveying. So right now, yeah, I'm sure you've seen that, right? They go out there with the two poles and they measure everything on the ground. Um, those types of applications, while I think they're good in some situations, imagine if you're in a swamp area, like you
Yeah,
can't physically walk through all of that, and it's really hard to kind of get into some of these places. So I think in terms of inspection and survey, I think that's going to be a huge big thing as we continue to move forward. Especially like when you start thinking about power lines
yeah,
and pipelines and gas lines, right? These stretch across all of the world basically,
yeah,
and you have to be able to monitor those. And maybe you don't have somebody that is able to access all of those things. So what better way to do it than maybe boots on the ground every single time? Well, maybe start with a drone. And then if you know there's a problem, then you can send a person out there. It keeps them safer and
yeah,
it's more cost effective. And, you have the ability to do these more routine inspections, which ultimately should make us all safer. Because even back to kind of my example I gave earlier, we're helping with the wildfire spotting. Well, sometimes those are caused by power lines that like a
yeah,
tree falls on. Well, if we're helping to inspect the power lines, we might be able to say, hey, you have overgrowth of these trees that now are in the way of these power lines. And if there were to be a bad storm, those trees would fall right on those power lines. So it, like I said, all these things kind of feed into one another, and it sounds, like it's just one solution, but it's really a multi-pronged problem. It's just different people
yeah.
involved in that different problem.
And what I like about it is you have more access to different places that you normally can't as a person,
Mm.
just because we are very limited. And at the same time, there's less chance of things getting overlooked, which is for
Mm.
most cases where the problem actually lies. And imagine if you overlook where the fungus actually is. I mean, that's catastrophic.
Well, and there's usually a cost associated with that, right? Like
Yeah,
every time you have to get a team of people to go out there and
yeah,
whoopsie, I missed a spot. Well, now you got to pay for them to go back out there to do it all over again. At least if you have a drone, you can kind of go and be like, hey, this is the area I need to check and take that data. You can know before you leave, did you get everything you needed? as opposed to having to go back and process it all and do it all that way.
It's amazing. And since we're nearing the end of the podcast, as someone who is at the forefront of aerospace innovation, what advice would you give to aspiring entrepreneurs who's looking to make a mark on their field?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would say, first of all, passion is very key. In everything that I've done in my life, it is the passion and the intrigue and the curiosity that has driven me. And if you don't have those things, it can be really hard to kind of wake up and put your nose to the grindstone every day. Um, and me as a co-founder of this company, I'll speak for myself. I definitely work more than your average work week.
Yeah.
And it's what I love, and I don't mind doing it, but it is my lifestyle. And so I think you have to be passionate, love what you do, be committed to it, and you can change the world.
And what's your take on work-life balance? Because some people, yeah,
Oh
yeah,
boy.
it's quite an issue today. What do you think of work-life balance?
Um, Candidly, I'm probably not the best person to ask on that,
Yeah.
but I would say that I am making a dedicated effort to be better about that. And I will say something that I've known is important for me is at least once a quarter for like
Yeah.
4 days, like over the course of a weekend, like a Friday and a Monday. I'll tell my team, like, unless it's a really big emergency, I'm turning off my phone. So like being able to have some time, even if it's just on the weekends, to be able to like turn off your phone and walk away from it, I think is really important. Once a quarter, I try to do like that, 4 day sort of a thing where, you're just really letting things, letting your mind rest, because otherwise you can't come up with new creative ideas,
Yeah.
and you can't be as effective as you want to be because, you're tired and you're not feeling your best. So I think that's really important. Getting outside, walking around, just taking in some nature. That's all very important. My dog keeps me honest on that one.
And I think most people don't realize is that if you want to achieve something great, you need to be very unbalanced most of the time.
Oh, yeah, I do think you have to have a positive attitude.
Yeah.
One thing I'll say is, especially at what we're doing, the goods are the best it's ever been, right? And the bads can feel like, oh, this is the worst moment of
Yeah.
my life, or like everything is crumbling down. And you have to just know that that's the ebb and the flow of how this
Yeah.
goes. We're doing something that's incredibly, inherently hard. Um, and some of the best need to ride you out through the lowest of the
Yeah.
lows, and if you just wait 5 minutes, something different will happen. And then there will be a new thing that, you're focused on. But try to take your second, appreciate the good. And if the bad is bad, just wait a couple more minutes. You'll find a way to work around it, because always there's a solution. You as a journalist, right? Like you always have a deadline. You always have something due. But at the end of the day, I'm sure you always get it done, because that's just how it works.
Yeah.
It's sometimes magic, but it comes together.
And I gotta say, if from time to time you don't feel like the world is gonna crush you, you're doing something wrong.
Yeah, you're probably being a little too lazy, a little too easy on yourself, right? You
Yeah,
gotta you gotta push the boundaries, and if you're not, you can't be afraid to fail. You gotta just keep pushing the boundaries.
absolutely. And what advice personally on life would you give to someone who's listening today? Just a general advice.
Oh, general advice. Um, I will say that no matter what, your family, your friends, your loved ones, those are the people that are going to be there through the thick and thin. Don't,
Yeah,
I know everybody gets busy, but you can't ignore them, because when the good is really good, you're going to want people to celebrate and be, happy and be excited for where you are. And when the bad is really bad, you're going to need them to be by your side. So at the end of the day, if it comes to work-life balance, back to your other question, I would say that's really my secret there. Is I have a wonderful family, wonderful friends, and a really great husband that is a great supporter. So I think those people are key, and they're my secret to keeping everything going.
That's amazing, and I don't think people appreciates their family enough just because of how what emotions they can bring into your life. And I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, and
Uh,
you have to have people to celebrate with.
do you have any last message to anyone who's listening, or
Well, John Paul, I just want to thank you for taking the time to speak with me today. I will say the aerospace industry is growing, but the
yeah,
drone space, even inside the aerospace industry, is growing so rapidly. I often have people that say, well, how do I get involved? Or how do I just get started? A lot of times there are different schools or different park districts
yeah,
have clubs related to, robotics or aerospace. Those are great ways to even just kind of get involved.
yeah,
And it may not be on the tech side of things. They still need help with things like business and management and marketing. And so if you are interested in entrepreneurship, there are spaces and places to go and mingle with people that are also interested in the same things. So even if you maybe don't have a background in it today, you just got to get yourself out there
yeah,
and find some of those local organizations where you can get involved. Because I think something unique I found about the drone
yeah.
industry in particular is because it is so new, even some people later in their careers have come from different industries. And I think that's what makes it so unique is that people bring together so many different perspectives,
Yeah.
and so many different backgrounds. And we're really building some cool stuff at such a fast rate, I think, because it's so new and it just has so much energy in it and people and all the good things that ideas come from.
That's amazing, and I think that's what is the secret of how drone industry is growing fast since it started is because of the fact that not everyone has the same perspective on things.
Exactly.
And finally, I again want to thank you for joining me on the New World podcast. Where can people find you?
You can find me. I'm at Michelle at WingXpand, WingXpand.com. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. The company is on all of those platforms as well. You can just find us at wingspan.com on our website. You can check out Wing X-Ray. That's mostly what we talked
Yeah.
about today. We also have another platform called Wing X-Ray. You can check that one out. We are hiring for a multitude of roles. So if you are having to find yourself looking or know of other people that may be a good fit, feel free to reach out to us. But thank you for taking the time and for shedding a little light on the drone industry.
Thank you as well for joining me, and again, it was a pleasure. That's all for today's episode of the New World Podcast. We have explored some fascinating topics with our amazing guests, shedding light on the upcoming New World. If you enjoyed today's episode and today's discussion and want to stay updated on the future episodes, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to the podcast. And if you found value on what we have discussed, please consider leaving us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Remember, if you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover, or if you are interested in being a guest in the future, please feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn or email me at john.paul@aicinix.com and add New World Podcast, all capital, in the subject line so I can see it. I always love hearing from our listeners. And don't forget to check out our amazing guests. You can find more information about them by the contact details we provided earlier. Again, thank you for tuning in on the New World Podcast. I know your time is very important and I try to always make the next episode better than the last. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, keep innovating. This is John Paul Flores signing off from the New World Podcast.